You have a perfectly peaceful aquarium. Everyone gets along. Then one morning, you find a fish with shredded fins and bite marks all over it, and you can't figure out who did it, because the attacker is a fish you never would have suspected. This is one of the most confusing moments in the aquarium hobby, because aggression in fish comes from two completely different systems. One is rooted in nature, one is created by your tank. And if you can't tell those two systems apart, you're blaming the wrong fish, trying the wrong solution, and the problem keeps going. Today, we're going to break this down clearly. Which aggression is natural and unavoidable, which is completely preventable, why certain fish are born aggressive, and at the end, there's a paradox worth sitting with. Can having fewer fish actually create more aggression than having more? Aggression in fish comes from two distinct sources. The first is evolutionary, shaped over millions of years, genetically encoded, impossible to remove. This aggression is part of the fish's nature. It can't be eliminated, only managed. The second is environmental, a fish that isn't naturally aggressive, turning aggressive under specific conditions. This kind of aggression is preventable, but it usually goes undetected because the fish looked calm yesterday. And here's the most important point. Both systems look identical from the outside. The same chasing, the same biting, the same fin damage, but the causes are completely different. And without knowing the cause, finding the right solution isn't possible. For some fish, aggression isn't a choice, it's a survival strategy. The cichlid family is the most well-known example. In the wild, every male cichlid is in constant competition for breeding territory. The one with the best rock, the best cave, the best positioned nest is the one that reproduces. The others get eliminated. That simple equation, played out over millions of years, pushed the most aggressive individuals to the front. We've already talked about bettas, 400 years of selective breeding, flower horns, Oscars, Jack Dempseys, all operating on the same core mechanism. Territory equals reproductive access equals survival. For these fish, aggression isn't a personality flaw. It's an evolutionary necessity. But this aggression has two key characteristics. First, it has specific triggers. These fish don't attack everything. They attack when their territory is entered, when they're ready to breed, when they need to defend a nest. Second, it's manageable. The right tank layout, the right division of space, the right choice of tank mates. Their aggression doesn't disappear entirely, but it can be kept under control. So what about aggression with no obvious cause? That one is far more insidious. When a calm fish suddenly turns aggressive, most people's first instinct is to check whether a new fish was recently added. But sometimes the problem isn't right in front of your eyes. A fish under chronic stress starts to see the world differently. Movements it would normally ignore start to register as threats. Another fish swimming past is no longer just another fish swimming past. It becomes a potential rival, a potential danger. And here's where something interesting happens. Research shows that some fish accustomed to social living, when kept in isolation for extended periods, actually pick more intense fights when reintroduced. Because for them, isolation isn't rest, it's a source of stress. As stress increases, tolerance drops. As tolerance drops, aggression rises. This is why some fish you bring home from the pet store are far more aggressive than expected in those first few days. You're placing them in a new tank, but they're already arriving with a backlog of accumulated stress. And here's the most dangerous thing about stress aggression. From the outside, it's almost impossible to distinguish from natural aggression. The same chasing, the same biting, the same fin damage, but the cause is entirely different. And if the cause is stress, the aggressive fish isn't actually the problem. It's the symptom of the problem. So what are the things that stress a fish out? Some of them you'd expect, some you wouldn't. Temperature, for instance. In one study, when water temperature was raised, aggression in certain cichlid species increased noticeably. And this wasn't just a short-term reaction. It persisted for months. So sometimes, when summer arrives, your fish seems to have had a personality change. It hasn't. The environment changed. Another trigger is the absence of hiding spots. Think about it. You're forced to be visible at all times. Nowhere to retreat to. Nowhere to rest. Every other fish in the tank has a constant line of sight to you. In that situation, the tank stops being a safe space. And some fish respond to that pressure by becoming aggressive. Then there's something most people never even consider. lack of rest. Fish kept under constant current, constantly disturbed, or unable to settle even at night, gradually become more on edge over time. And here's the interesting part. Sometimes the aggression in your tank isn't coming from a bad fish, just a fish having a bad time. This is why, when you see aggression, the first question shouldn't be, which fish is the problem? It should be, is this fish actually aggressive? Or, is this fish telling me something is wrong? This is one of the strangest truths in the aquarium hobby. Too few fish can sometimes create a more aggressive tank than too many. Why? In the wild, territorial fish encounter multiple rivals. Their energy gets distributed, their aggression spreads across different targets. But if there are only two fish in a tank, a dominant one and a subordinate one, the dominant fish's full attention locks onto a single target, 24 hours a day, every day. No escape. That means the subordinate fish lives under chronic stress with nowhere to go. And ironically, adding more fish can actually be the solution. Attention gets divided, the hierarchy reorganizes, and the dominant fish's energy stops being funneled into a single individual. Tiger barbs are the classic example. In a small group, 3 to 4 fish, constant aggression. In a large group, 8 to 10 fish, aggression drops dramatically. Same species, same tank, completely different dynamic. And know this, sometimes the solution to aggression is as simple as rearranging the decor. A new layout resets every fish's familiar boundaries. The dominant fish has to explore its territory from scratch, and while it does, everyone else gets to breathe. Some aggression is never seen, but it's felt. Microaggression. No open fighting, no biting, but the dominant fish cuts in at every feeding, occupies every shelter, controls every prime swimming spot. How does the fish on the receiving end hold up? Constant stress, slowed growth, weakened immunity, fading color, and eventually, disease. When you see this picture, you check the water. Everything looks normal, because the problem isn't in the water, it's in the social dynamic. Research has put numbers to this. Fish living under unstable social conditions carry significantly higher cortisol levels than those in stable, established groups. A hierarchy that remains unresolved, where it's never clear who's dominant and who's subordinate, is a source of chronic stress for the entire tank. So how do you spot it? There are ways to distinguish between these two systems. Natural aggression is concentrated around a specific territory or object. It increases during breeding season, then subsides. The trigger is visible, a territory violation, an approach to the nest. Fish outside the aggressive individual stay calm. Stress aggression has no specific trigger. Overall reactivity is just elevated. It's constant, with no pauses. The aggressive fish itself shows signs of stress, color changes, rapid gill movement. It often starts suddenly, following a water change or the addition of a new fish. Making this distinction also points you toward the right solution. For natural aggression, territory management, breaking lines of sight, choosing compatible species. For stress aggression, find the trigger and eliminate it. Is it temperature? Lack of hiding spots? A history of isolation? Understocking? The tank looked peaceful. Water parameters were normal, but one fish had completely shredded fins. Now you can understand why. Was it natural aggression or a stress response? A dominant fish zeroed in on a single target, or cortisol rising because the water got too warm. That distinction is the difference between the right fix and the wrong one. Has your tank ever had aggression that seemed to come out of nowhere? Did you ever find the culprit? Or did it stay a mystery? Write it in the comments. I genuinely want to read these stories. In the next video, we'll talk about whether your fish actually recognizes you and how you can tell. If you don't want to miss it, you know what to do. See you under the water.